data, metadata. A lot of people like it. A lot of people don't know how to use it. I got one email from somebody in relation to my Tuesday reminder saying a lot of stations only get their call letters up, and sometimes not even the correct call letters. So here's a great opportunity. Rich Redmond is with us. We're going to talk about what you can do, how you can do it better, and answer your questions. So Rich, you want to take it?
Thanks, Barry. Let's see if I can share the screen here. And there we go. Can you guys see slide up?
There it is.
All right. I'm a little debilitated today. I'm only using my laptop, so I've gotten used to having two screens. So having to do everything on one, I didn't realize how archaic I feel. So look, we'll just kind of step through and talk a little bit about managing metadata. Really, when we talk about metadata in this context, it's really mostly talking about the ways you can manage what displays on a radio, whether that's, RDS, could be HD, could be DAB if you're in a different part of the world, could be to your website, on a stream. So, and as you guys have questions, just, shout out. So Broadcast Electronics here in the US is part of Elenos Group. The group has several different parts. Elenos, which builds radio transmitters, which several people are familiar with. Broadcast Electronics has Audio Vault, some other software products, including data management, AM and FM transmitters. iTelco is television, and Pro TV is originally from Philips. It's digital modulation, and so that's even where the Broadcast Electronics HD digital HD exciters come from. Relative to radio, we've got, a bunch of different products that have for radio transmitters and so forth. At NAB and here on this forum, we talked about a new transmitter product we launched this year called QuickBlock, which is a scalable modular platform. And then you may know us for things like Audio Vault and NewsBoss and a few other software products. But really, the context of today's discussion, and look, well, I'll use the reference of a product we make called the Radio Experience. There are other metadata platforms. So, the context that I'm discussing is more the way you can do things. Again, I'll use what we do as an example, but it, as much as I'd like to tell you it's the only one in the world that does it, there are choices, but certainly something to take advantage of. So the Radio Experience has been around for a long period of time, originally managing things like song artist and title and some station branding, as well as things like news alerts and weather that could be sent to a radio using RDS. And then when HD came along, you were able to similarly send text information and then now album art to be displayed in car radios or other radios that might be able to demodulate that. Recently at BE, we've retooled the software and enhanced this, and so it's now a cloud-based application that's hosted, so you can access it from anywhere. There is some middleware that lives at the station, but it really allows you to manage audio related data, not just going to things like RDS and HD, which we tend to think of because they're transmission standards, but really any type of method that you're delivering audio. So whether it's streaming an app on the website, it really doesn't matter. So there's some things that have been evolving in the market really outside of what any of us make or run at a radio station that are really changing the dashboard. And it's pretty hard to get in a car these days without some sort of a screen. Now some cars have really big screens and some are a bit smaller, but part of the reason that has been the mandate for things like backup cameras in vehicles. And then also, auto manufacturers are putting more and more controls on a touch screen as opposed to dedicated tactile controls. And so for us as broadcasters, we now have a larger and larger screen in front of people in the vehicle that is able to deliver something other than just showing your frequency. Now, there's some interesting data out there. A lot of times it's pretty easy to go, yeah, but only brand new cars have that, and how practical is it? I was a little bit surprised when I was doing some research, but about 80% of the cars on the road in the US today can display some sort of visual content. Now, some of it's just analog RDS, and it may be an LED display on, an aftermarket or factory installed radio. Or it could even be, one of these larger screens that we talk about. And then about 25% of all the vehicles have a much more enhanced full color graphic capability with HD radio or hybrid radio. So you've heard some discussions with things like radio DNS and things like the Xperi Auto Stage, which allow you to, amongst other things, display visual content using a hybrid approach where you're using IP connectivity to kind of display some of this other information rather than digital radio. But again, I think the big takeaway for us is lots and lots of vehicles today that our listeners are driving around in have the ability to display something more than just the frequency. Now, the other part that I found really interesting was you go, that's great, but other than guys who are really into, your favorite radio station, who cares? Well, the guys over at Westwood One did some studies that they published with, some market research firms. But these I found really interesting. About 70% of, regular radio listeners, so people who listen, reasonable amount every week. Somebody who listens once a month doesn't fall in this category, but regular users, about 70% actually pay attention to the content on the screen, their research found. And about 2/3 of these guys had some sort of a recall about things they had seen, either talking about music or talking about retailers. And so the recall, when there was some sort of visual message tied in with, for example, an ad or some sort of advertisement, was about 30% higher than audio alone. And about 85% who recalled that there was an ad with visual content also indicated that, these were people that they planned to visit. So like, I don't know, I guess if they're advertising TV sets or car stereos, or you needed to go buy a couch, the research says you tended to remember things that had both audio and visual content. And then the other thing that I thought was interesting is when they talk to ad agencies, about 75% of them were actually interested in using visual content, and they realized that, they were willing to pay a premium for this. So while this usually isn't, this kind of information is not always in the context of what we talk about on the engineering side, I think the germane point is that, there may be revenue opportunities both for commercial and non-commercial stations that we can bring to the table as engineers by having a bit more robust management of, what's showing up on the radio screens. So, there's plenty of ways to get data to the radio. In a very basic level, you can just hook up your automation system and you send out the song, artist, and title. Good news is it's fast and it's convenient. The bad news kind of is it sends verbatim whatever you type in. So if you've, misspelled, the Eagles' greatest hits, then that's exactly what's going to show up on the screen. Or if you have some abbreviations, it's unfiltered. It kind of shows the outside world what in essence is, an internally oriented cart label. But that's probably just, I guess I would almost say, table stakes. With TREplus, the product we have now, we're able to kind of be this aggregator where playout systems are part of it. You can pick up RSS feeds, things from like NOAA weather, different sports. You could have a live screen in a studio. So if you've got a talk program and, the producer wants to pose a question or, put out some piece of information that could be typed in. And certainly information from EAS alerts can be ingested. Album art that can, display on web pages and HD and so forth, streaming, and then advertising messages. And then all of those things go out to not only the terrestrial distribution, but it can go to the other ways that you're delivering your content. Because after all, terrestrial transmission is just one method of delivery, right? There's a bazillion different ways you can stream and other ways people consume content. So whatever way you'd like to deliver the radio experience or other products like it, aggregate all the types of data that you might have coming in, including advertising messages or promotions messages. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we can send it out to all the different platforms that you're on. So it's kind of almost like a traffic cop. Now, how you do this, it's a little bit like a combination of an audio automation system and a traffic system that we might think of scheduling spots. So we can set up different types of schedules and different messages. So for example, you think of a message as similar to a cart. And so if you wanted to play something that was in addition to song, artist, and title, maybe you've got a sponsor, or maybe you're promoting that, a station share-a-thon is this weekend, or, there's some event you're having in the community. All of these kinds of things can be scheduled and played. And then you can decide, for example, you may have slightly different text that you show on RDS than you have on the HD radio message, because they've got a little bit different characteristics available. If you want to attach album art, you can do so. But it's all done via a fairly straightforward web interface that allows you to edit all of those things. As you might expect, you need to keep track of the fact when these things play. So again, you're going to want to have some sort of software that tells you this is when this particular message played, and if you're programming it across multiple stations, which station it's on and what time of day and so forth. And then those can get tied out, for your ability to if you do something commercial, your ability to tell the sponsor, hey, we did indeed run this message however many times. The other thing we've done that's kind of unique is we have a feature called Content Watchdog. And what it will do is it will interface, Ben, you'll like this. We've used one of your receivers, an Innovonics receiver that, has the RDS, for example, text. And then we do a comparison saying this is what was transmitted, this is what's received. There's also some other software-defined radio dongles that will do that. Yeah, I thought you'd like that. I think it's one of the Sophias that we've done it on, so it'll do it for HD or for RDS. But we had some customers that said, I kind of want to make sure the content, what I'm sending is really getting out there. And so with the advancement in receivers, it was not too difficult to be able to do an interface. The user interface, you can look at different stations. So, if you had 5 or 6 you're programming, or, if it was a whole group, you can drill into, the stations you're looking at. You can set up clocks as to, what type the promo clock is, or if it's some sort of commercial, what days of the week, the usual kinds of things you would expect. I did mention, there are options for cover art. In this case, we've got an interface with Grace Note. We can work with other licensed places for the content. Or if you had your own, if it was a station logo, or it was a logo for a specific show, or some other such content, you can put those in. The point here is, since sometimes the same song shows up on different albums, when there are multiple choices for a specific song in the library, you're able to define which one you want to use. So, sometimes people have a favorite, or sometimes songs show up as coming off of greatest hits, but you want it from the original album. You've got some choices here. And like I said, the ability to ingest. This is kind of what I was mentioning. It's just a conceptual block diagram, but basically at the station, there's an off-air receiver. There's a link between that and the software that allows us to query the receiver, um, understand what channel it's on, and then do a comparison between what's showing up in the either HD or RDS text versus what was transmitted. And so if you want to kind of provide that closed loop of, yes, indeed, I promoted the Philharmonic is playing on Tuesday, or that, Bob's Burgers has a sale on hamburgers on Friday, you can validate that the message got through. It also kind of is another way to give you a little bit of assurance that you don't have any transmission errors. An RDS generator got locked up or something like that, or there's some other reason why, even though I'm sending it, it's not making it through. So it gives you a little bit extra assurance. Now, the behind the scenes part's not all that exciting. It's a screen, you schedule some stuff, and it all the tools are there, but the thing that probably really is most interesting is, so what's it look like on a car radio? And so I kind of have some examples here. And the thing that really I have kind of come to notice even myself is, when you're in an area when somebody's been doing a pretty good job of putting up content, when it's not there, you kind of end up missing it. And so, if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you kind of see a display that's, if you have no RDS, for example, versus, the bottom right is somebody's programmed their RDS. And I think, as someone mentioned earlier, they put their format type in, they put in their call letters, and then in this case, they've got some song, artist, and title information at the very least that shows up. And so, there was, I remember in some of the early days of satellite radio, one of the most commented on capabilities was the fact you could look at the radio and what song's on the air, right? And so that led a lot of people to want to add RDS to be able to do that on analog FM or to do it in HD radio. But it kind of, again, continues to be true. If you've ever had the chance to, if you think about sports, I walk into the room and the football game's on. If I haven't been in there right away, I almost instinctively look for the score because I'm not sure exactly where the game is, right? Where if I'm listening to play-by-play on the radio, I could potentially listen to 5 minutes or more before somebody said what the score is. And so I don't really know. The ability to manage the data that shows up on the radio allows you to have some of these same things that consumers have really become reliant on or start to expect, whether it be television, whether they think about, I'm watching or I'm listening to a stream on a sports app. Different platforms have done a pretty good job of using metadata to engage consumers. So if we think about the other things you can do with RDS, it really can go far beyond just song, artist, and title. So while sometimes it's easy to jump to the idea that, well, I've got to do HD to do anything here. Actually, no, RDS really is fairly capable, but you really need something in front of it to manage what you're saying. So the upper right-hand corner kind of gives you an idea of, look, in addition to the station call letters and the format, you can have other things that rotate or show up in the extended RDS text. And in that case, it's kind of station branding. Or there's an opportunity for advertisement. And I'll talk about a couple different stations in a few minutes that we've had that had success here, but this is actually a really pretty big opportunity. And it's not just limited to commercial stations. So I kind of engaged a former colleague of mine who's at Wiley Rhine now, an attorney, and just kind of stepped through, were there any limitations for non-commercial stations on doing advertisement via radio text? And, ostensibly it was, as long as you follow the normal underwriting rules, no calls to action and so forth, the rules that have been in place for audio content for some time, it's absolutely applicable. And when we look at the kinds of messages the commercial stations have been using, frankly, they're not much different than what's in an underwriting announcement. So the bottom right-hand corner is what one of our clients does. They have an attorney that buys a kind of an overlay. So during commercial breaks, when most stations kind of just put up call letters and don't run any text that goes with each 30-second commercial, this station runs some text that is for a local attorney, and it has the website up, which, again, is pretty similar to what underwriting announcements are. And so in our customer base, they've generally had pretty good success with, I guess I would think of them as more institutional advertisement, things like attorneys, doctors, insurance agents, car dealerships, not so much a, come in tomorrow and get $2 off a hamburger kind of thing. Now, HD radio does give you some of the same capabilities, but then a little bit more. And really the most notable is the ability to deliver graphics. So whether it's song artist and title information, and then you put album art, the art cover that we just showed, whether you put in your station logo that maybe you put up when an announcer's talking, if you have particular program graphics, if you're a public station and you want to put up an all things considered image, for example, or if you have a talk personality that has a logo or an image that they use with their program, you could do the same. There's really nothing stopping what type of contents there. There's some technical requirements, but it's pretty straightforward. Now, when you stretch your mind a little bit, we've had some stations that in the upper right, you see that in addition to the text, like we had in RDS, you can put out a logo that talks about, in this case, carpet installation, or you could even have a QR code that you could send, or somebody could link to a website. And that one I've actually tried, and it does indeed work. I can put the phone up to the screen and it'll take me to whatever, web page the QR code's a link to. So again, just kind of some other things that give you opportunities. Now, I did mention that, unlike a lot of times when we talk as engineers about here's some capital equipment that we'd like to invest in, and we can talk about audio processing that improves the sound of the station, or products in a studio that help talent operate better, or a more reliable transmitter, whatever it is. A lot of times there's not always a payoff. It's a little bit more of a secondary benefit. Like, we're not going to go off the air because the stuff's more reliable. We'll sound better so people will listen longer. In this case, there's a pretty good correlation between having the ability to do some of these text-based advertisements. And frankly, I was quite pleased to understand that the payoff is pretty strong. So one of our customers, they're in a top 25 market in the Midwest. They've got a cluster of 5 stations, and they went to a couple different, an attorney, a healthcare provider, and financial services company, and sold out all 5 stations. So it's an annual contract. They just run the text information. So some of their stations are HD and some are analog, but they get about $300K annually in additional revenue that they weren't able to address before. But even when we went to a smaller broadcaster, we had a customer who'd been an Audio Vault user, went with TRE to put in song artist and title, and then learned about the advertising capabilities. They were able to secure a car dealership. And so, it's a few $1,000s a month across each of their stations, and it was a goodly amount of revenue. So I guess I would say the thing that's kind of intriguing to me here is, we probably have an opportunity to have a different kind of discussion, with the owners or the managers of stations we might, consult or work for, that there's an opportunity for revenue that A, they may not have thought of, or B, didn't even know existed. And, we have an opportunity to bring that to the table, which, again, is usually not the discussion we're having. So anyway, I'm happy to go back to any specific points, but I think really the context is, you know, when you see a radio that's only got the frequency up, especially if many of the others in the market or the streaming apps that I listen to have song, artist, and title, branding and positioning, and even potentially advertising, my station looks like something's missing because I don't have it. Um, Certainly consumers are more and more accustomed to having visual content to go along with the audio they listen to, whether it be on a streaming app or even if it's, obviously television, but even, digital radio, satellite, and RDS. As more stations deploy it, it becomes the norm. And there's an opportunity for you to bring, potential new revenue to the table as a point of discussion rather than just talking about an expense. So that's kind of the context of what I wanted to share. Again, I'm happy, Barry. I don't see a dialogue box if somebody's texting in. So if somebody had asked questions, I haven't seen them on my screen, but I'm happy to jump to any questions anyone
All
would
right.
like to discuss.
Well, I'll start for you. And apparently, NRSC is releasing the G.304 metadata standard next week. Are you aware of it, and are you working with it?
Uh, yeah, so we've had Tim Hardy is one of my colleagues at BE. Some of you may know Tim when he was head of engineering at Nautel. Tim's generally been participating at NRSC, and we've talked to the guys on the group, and part of our move to the new platform was to give us a lot more flexibility for engagement. So, well, I can't tell you that personally I've been through the specs myself. I know we understood that it was coming, and our intentions to be compatible. We've also gone to engage some areas that weren't so obvious in the past. So we've met with the guys at NPR. I think it's called Metapub, is a platform that they have where you can actually pull in information right down to the news stories. So uh, part of our investment in software, Barry, and whomever had asked the question, was so that we've got a bit more flexibility. While TRE's been around for some time, the software was a bit more rigid in how it managed things, and so we needed to get to something that allowed us to be a lot more flexible.
Good. Folks, if you have a question, you can put it in the chat box. You can click on raise hand or press your alternate A and you can talk to us. Rich, one of the questions that comes up is that every automation system has a different way of sending out the metadata. And I'm going to guess that you are conversant with the different automation systems and that would automatically adjust.
Yeah, so it's when I kind of say we're in this middleware position, you're right, because whether you're looking at, I mean, obviously we know Audio Vault pretty well, but we work with guys who use OpEx from BSI. We've got guys who use Enco, we've got guys who use RCS. They're all a little bit different. So we have a specific interface for all of the popular systems, the biggest ones. We've done Playout One recently, and then we've got kind of, I guess I would call it a universal interface to take kind of those bespoke systems. And then on the other side, RDS generators. Of course, Ben and Innovonics, they've got a bunch of great products. Some guys are still using older things like the FMB 80, if it hasn't blown up yet, from Automat. The other place that we're seeing that's more and more popular is in the audio processor. We did an install last week, and 4 out of the 5 stations that the group had in a market were all running Omnia 11s, I mean Omnia 9s rather, and using the built-in RDS generator. So yeah, you do kind of spend a bunch of time on handoffs, and not just on the traditional sense, Barry, putting the appropriate information for things like, I probably didn't highlight so much, in addition to what we did traditionally, which is kind of this middleware of text in and text out. We've also put a place to manage your information to go to radio DNS. So one of the things we heard from customers is things like auto stage and radio DNS, there wasn't really an organized way to manage that information if you had more than one station. And so we've put some capabilities in here so you can put in the kind of static station information. So a radio could fail over or switch over to a stream uh, for your content, but then also send the textual data out. So it's a little bit of a kind of a warehouse of and management tool of data and a lot of interfaces.
So in general, you would say that the station would take its automation system and then put the output of that to the TRE, which would then go on to the transmitter.
Yeah, that's right. Because as you start to add a bit more capability, not that automation systems haven't added some nice capabilities, but if I'm doing high school sports, for example, and I want to put that the Cougars are 7 and the Cowboys are 14, I can type that on the screen in the control room and put it out. Or frankly, it could be on the guy's laptop who's doing the play-by-play.
Right away.
If you gave them access. Yeah.
Ed
So
Pitt-
those are kind of some things that go beyond the automation.
Okay. Ed Pitts on YouTube says, I'm in market 244, set up RDS sponsor on one station, and within the week sold additional sponsorships on the other 6 stations.
Yeah, exactly. It's to be honest with you, as we started helping support customers do this, there was a lot of opportunity here. And, I live in Cincinnati and our factory's in Quincy, Illinois. So I go back and forth quite a bit and, it's about 6 hours. So I get a bunch of radio time. And, the good news is there's a lot of stations doing this and taking advantage of it. And it's nice to see that whether I'm passing through some of these small towns, I went through Decatur, Illinois, and there were several stations that had, like a tire store sponsor on their RDS. There were a bunch that had, no RDS turned on, but exactly, even in small markets, guys that get creative and use these tools, you can go make some money. And the sales guys at the stations have been telling me that it's actually one of the easier sales that they make versus, I'm trying to go sell 30 or 15-second spots.
Okay.
Rich, what I call that is RDS envy. I think when somebody sees it on one station, then they go, hey, how do I get that on mine? I'm really glad to see you guys doing the TREplus. This is really good. I also have a cliche that I say is that RDS encoders are not overly intelligent. It doesn't matter whose brand you have, but they just simply take whatever you send to them and put them out over the air. And so if you want RDS to look really nice, you have to have a middleware in there. And it looks like you guys are doing that. So congratulations, kudos to you for that.
Oh, thanks, Ben. It's one of those things where we had something that worked pretty well for a while, but it was getting a little long in the tooth. And then customers were asking us to do different things. One of the capabilities that we got asked for and we put in here is, especially if you own multiple stations across different areas, we've kind of created a couple of tiers here. And one tier we call a network tier, but it just means it's got more capabilities. But the point is, you can set up a bunch of groups. So if you go, I want to sell these kinds of ads and I want to send text out to my North Carolina stations, great, you can organize that. If you go, I want to put it out on my AOR rock stations, maybe even if I'm nationwide, great, I can set up those groups. So we've set up a pretty powerful hierarchy that can allow for, I guess I would call them national messages or ads and local messages and ads. So if a group goes, hey, I want to go to Coca-Cola and I want to do something across all my stations, they don't need to go to every single station and go insert that. There's a way to go say, well, I'm going to pick these, or I'm going to put it on my AOR stations or whatever.
That brings us to a question from Robert Lembruggen. Can station logo appear when no commercial images are present?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got a couple of options there. Robert. So you could decide, for example, that if you wanted to rotate between album art and your station logo, it can rotate during the song, so it's not just album art. If when the announcer's speaking, you want to have the station logo pop up, and then something different during commercials, or if I have nothing during commercials, I can pop up the station logo or the program logo. If Rick and Bubba in the morning has their own logo, that can be on when they're on. And if you got John Tesh at night, probably wouldn't have both of those on the same station, but if you did, you could do that. So yeah, you're able to mix and match across those, so you can kind of put up what you want.
Okay, I see Chris Hayes' hand, but first, Brian Black in the chat box. We do use RDS on our stations that we feed with our regular STL, but we feed some of our translators via the internet. Is there a good way to get the RDS data over the internet and put it on the air as well?
Yeah, so half of this is probably a good question for Ben, but contemporary RDS generators can take TCP/IP connections. So the RDS generator lives wherever the transmitter is, and we can send the connection wherever you have. So if you're feeding over the internet, in the old days, you might have had something like an RS-232 connection, and that you needed the RDS generator in the studio, and then maybe you ran it over a composite STL. But I'll defer to Ben. He probably can.
I think that leads to the second half of his question. He says, we do have a PIRA unit at the translator that puts our call letters on the air, but we'd like to add song titles. This may be beyond the capability of a PIRA, or does someone know?
Well, for Innovonics anyway, yeah, you can send the data over RS-232 if you still have an old STL or something like that. But if you have an internet connection, it can either take TCP or UDP data, and it's very easy to do, and it's instantaneous. I mean, the packet load is really small, so it happens instantaneously.
So you're saying maybe he needs a new generator instead of what he's got now, maybe from Innovonics, amazingly enough.
Well, for sure that will work. I will say you'll have to look at the PIRA. We have had some customers ask us to interface. There are some that don't have a TCP/IP connection, and in those cases, it'd be pretty hard to go make this work remotely. I think they do have a version that does. I don't know if it's upgradable, but look, there's a lot of great generators out there, and frankly, check your transmitter, because more and more there are a number of transmitters that come with basic RDS capability. Sometimes you just don't know that are in there. I would say this: the standalone RDS generators are generally the most sophisticated. So some of the stuff Ben makes and others who make them, they generally have all the capabilities. There are some really small ones that do some features. Same with the transmitter manufacturers. They do some features built in, but you just kind of have to go take a look at each individual one. And look, if you've got something, we're happy to go help you take a look at it. And,
that was my question.
Sort it out.
That was my question. The PIRA is, I believe, Czech. So Brian could call into you or to.
Yeah, we gladly, take a look at what he's got, because we have some of those in the lab. Like I said, we had a customer who was using some, and I do know there were a couple different versions. But yeah, we're happy to help you sort it out. And look, if that one doesn't work, we can point you to other ones that we know do. Like I say, Ben's got some, and there are others. Good news is today there are a lot of choices in high quality RDS generators. 10, 15 years ago, there really weren't as many, but today there's some pretty darn capable boxes that are pretty cost effective.
Okay. Well, Mr. Hayes, you've been nice and patient. Please join us.
I actually comment or otherwise, I've been out of this game for about 5 years. And I know one of the problems we had back then was the inconsistency in the way the radios displayed RDS data. I'm sensing maybe you found a way to get around those problems, or is it just that the car radios have evolved?
Well, it's probably a little bit of both, right? I mean, I think for sure, car radios today, especially as they have the screens and people are putting in HD, it's kind of like chicken and egg. People are pushing out more data, so more data shows up on the screen. So there's a bit more interaction there. I think the auto manufacturers, because of things like HD, because of auto stage and hybrid radio, where it could switch to a stream, it's now becoming more common that there's metadata along with the audio. So they've got a whole bunch of different systems. The satellite radio, of course, have had it for some time. Things like Apple CarPlay has a bunch of metadata it manages. So I think the auto receiver guys have become a lot more attentive to managing metadata, because it's not just RDS is the only thing delivering it. More of the things in the infotainment system in the car has metadata that goes along with the audio.
The thing I was mostly interested in was RDS, because there's cars that do not have HD radio, which I think the lower end vehicles still kind of don't have HD as a standard option. You know, the cheap ones. Wondering if that how you address the display of that. I know my Prius, which has HD in it, but if I hit a station that has RDS data, whoops, excuse me, I've got something else on here. It displays it a little bit strangely. The HD display is fine, you know, but if you have,
I mean, each of them have some choices. I mean, I will say that one of the things that is pretty common is for the extended RDS text, not every car radio gives it as many characters as the field is allowed to see. So I would generally say the dynamic RDS, where it's sending things out 8 characters at a time, most cars, almost all of them, display that pretty well. Where they seem to be a bit inconsistent is in the, I think it's the radio text is the field they talk about, is the longer one. Now, Ben, you probably can comment a bit stronger than I. You're more of a receiver guy. That's the one that seems to people have a lot harder time displaying.
Ben?
Yeah, I have a Ford F-150, 1999, and it only displays the PS field, so the 8-character field. And I think the key is for broadcasters to understand what the difference between the PS field is and the radio text field. So PS is 8 characters, radio text is 64. And yeah, like Rich said, just about every RDS radio will display the PS, but not all of them will display radio text, or they won't show the whole thing. You know, they'll truncate it. So it is an issue depending upon the radio. I did a presentation a couple months ago about RDS, and just for grins, I went out in the parking lot and I looked at a Volkswagen, Mercedes, and a Subaru, and they were just all different. You know, how they displayed the RT+, as well as, you know, some of them would show the top 40 or the PTY code, the format codes. Some of them didn't. And it was really interesting just to look at the radios in the parking lot to see what they were. But yeah, if in doubt, do the PS. And if you've got a bigger screen or a newer car, then radio text usually shows up, or RT+, which is a couple of the slides that Rich showed had RT+, where it actually broke the artist name and the song title up separately on 2 different lines. That's RT+. So
seems like there might be a software app here to allow a station to know how it's going to appear on different makes or different car models, and they can identify what has to be done in the first 8 characters or something like that.
Yeah. So when the 8 characters, Barry, in our platform for when you're managing that, actually in the software, it shows you what it's, so even if you had a longer thing, you know, Bob's used tires are the best, and you put it in, it's going to break it into logical 8-character segments, and you can actually see that on the screen. And if you want to modify it, you can do so. So to Ben's point, probably the most common thing with the 8-character limitation, I think radios are pretty consistent in displaying that. And we, and I'm sure others, are pretty good at managing breaking up the text to go in those chunks in a pretty nice manner. It's the extended capabilities that have a bit more variability and a little bit more herding cats.
I see. Harold Helikainen in the chat box says, it seems like RDS data during commercials should be just the recorded with the commercial and be displayed similar to song title. Why the distinction?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There's a couple of things that it's kind of how customers choose to use it. So what some have found is traditionally, because commercials are relatively short, there's a certain amount of refresh time it takes to get the text out. So at some stations who are running 15-second commercials, 30-second commercials, the audio's changed by the time the text gets through the refresh cycle. So what stations had done for some period of time is they just didn't actually send any, I guess I'll call it commercial label information out, like you're saying, the text that plays along with the spot, and they would put station promos or just call letters up. That's kind of when this other opportunity for selling kind of a commercial billboard, if you will, where you said, okay, during the 2-minute or 3-minute stop set, I'm going to cover the commercials with, such and such attorney at law. But you can do either. I mean, in our case, the software allows you to do whichever you would like. I think the practical implication is stations hardly run 60-second spots anymore, and everything are 30s or less, that the refresh cycle with the radio, you just don't have very much time. The text is up there for somebody to absorb the message.
Sounds like that's an area for future improvements. Reiner?
Both to Rich and Ben, any validity in what I may or may not have heard last year or the year before, that without RDS, there's a number of radios in cars that just don't even display your station?
I'm not aware of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've not heard that. Now, I don't know if somebody has some scan capability that's looking for RDS and it skips over, but I've ended up driving a bunch of rental cars over the past couple of years, and every time I scan through the dial, it's always based on signal strength. I've not noticed that it skips over, so it's kind of as you would expect. Now, I don't know if there's, some other more sophisticated method, but I've not seen anything that would indicate that if you don't have it, it skips over it. For sure, if you're tuning through, it's not nearly, it's kind of like I said, when you look at a whole bunch that are there and then somebody just has their frequency, it kind of really shows up as being missing. Of course, what's even worse is when they still have like some sort of a default message in the RDS generator that's like the equivalent of, this is the model 1A2, or, this is a test or some silliness like that, but no, I haven't seen anything that indicates you're losing out if you don't have RDS.
The only thing that made sense to me was if you had the sophistication in your tuner to say, I only want to listen to top 40.
Well, yeah, right. If you were doing some sort by format code.
Okay, that made sense.
For sure. And, I would say that, so in other parts of the world where people run a network where it's the same format on different frequencies, like especially in Europe, but other parts of Asia, right? They're using alternative frequencies sent via RDS to switch the radio. So I've tuned into, the format might be, Heart or Kiss or whatever it is. And as I drive around, I jump from, 104.5 to 106.7 to 92.1, because the radio jumps to the next transmitter based on information in RDS. And for sure, if you didn't have RDS on, it would never tune to that transmitter because that information isn't there. Right. But in the United States, we don't really have that implemented. And so I wouldn't expect, cars to have any of that capability.
Okay.
at least not turned on.
All right. Ben, before you wander away, I mentioned to Gary this morning, I want you to come back and talk to us about your new receiver and do that soon.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we can do that.
We're coming up on an hour. I don't know what your time is like, Rich, but I'll do.
I did have a question for Ben. Do you have a new set of headphones that has 3 earmuffs so I can listen to all 3 receivers at once?
No.
Okay.
It's yeah, 1, 2, or 3. It's a rotary switch on the front.
Okay. Okay, good. I'm feeling better now, Ben. Thanks.
Okay. Well, again, I don't know if you can stay or for more questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to take some more questions.
Okay. If
You know,
you're
I've got a
on
little bit more time.
If you're on YouTube, you can put it in the chat box. I'd like to encourage those of you on YouTube, if you haven't already, hit the little subscribe button, and that will do 2 things. One, it will give you a opportunity to get a note every week when we start, in case you forget. And also it gets us a little bit closer to our 1,000 goal and the balloon drop, things like that. We have a little help this week. Unfortunately, Mary was on the road, I guess. So we'll talk more about 7BD, the broadcast depot, next week, because they're one of our sponsors and they help us out a lot. So more questions for Rich about RDS, about HD metadata. What are you guys doing to work well with it out there?
This was a fanciful thing that I threw on the engineering bench, scratch pad, of taking out of a simple automation system the countdown availability for the next song or the next set of, in an LPFM sense, underwriters, and back timing to push the RDS in 232C. Is that realistic? To know what the delay is before it transmits and just push that? I'm talking really old school, sorry.
Yeah, so you're worried about the transport delay to get to the RDS generator, or are you trying to
Yeah.
compensate for an audio delay and match up the data channel?
No, there's no audio delay to speak of that I'm aware of. But yeah, no, you had mentioned that in a 15-second spot.
Oh, yeah, it's probably more noticeable, frankly, on HD. The RDS is relatively quick. There's a little bit of delay. Now, there is kind of in the software, we do kind of keep track of what's on deck, and in some cases start sending it slightly early so that it does line up. I would say in HD, that's probably one of those areas that has a bit of opportunity for improvement. But the processing time there is a bit longer, right? Because you're going through, any, especially image, goes through the importer, it gets associated if it's the main channel with the exporter, and then you're going through the compression and the digital modulation. So it's more of an HD radio issue that there's a time kind of thing than there is so much on RDS. But it works. Ben, you've probably looked at more receivers than I, but it is definitely a receiver by receiver thing. They all respond a bit differently.
Yeah, for HD, the data is sent way before the next event happens. And then when the event is happening, then that image is triggered. So that's the way it works with HD. But asking about delay, in our RDS encoders, we do have the ability to put in a delay so that when an event happens, if you're doing HD or you have a profanity delay or something like that set up, the RDS gets the receiver, or the RDS encoder gets the information instantaneously when the event happens, but it can be delayed by however many seconds you want so that it corresponds to the audio, and those two things are more or less lined up.
Probably not alone in the frustration that was, mentioned about, okay, what does it look like on surely there's got to be an emulation software that tells us what a Sony or a Blaupunk looks like in an RDS sense, but there really isn't. You just have to go out and buy a bunch of radios and see what it looks like.
And I'll bet that Ben has a whole shelf full of radios.
Well, just like Rich was saying, in TREplus, the interface gives you an example of what it's going to look like. Same thing in our RDS encoder. It has a now playing page, and it shows you what it should could look like. But every receiver manufacturer is different, and you won't know until you tried every one or get feedback from people and they give you the information.
So the whole how the receiver displays is an art thing, not a technical thing as far as the receiver manufacturers are concerned.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because it's the standard. Well, there is some standardization, right? It's more about what format you're sending it in, and then they kind of choose how and where they put it on the screen. But back to what Ben was mentioning before, the kind of 8-character field is the one that's most universal, and most of the time people send the same information to that as they might send to the RT+ or the radio text. So generally, because you have these two things, you're pretty assured that everybody's going to see a very consistent 8-character at a time display of whatever your message is. And it's more the extended view on the screen. Some just do a better job of it than others.
Yes, Mark.
Oh, so just cleaning my screen off. It's all dusty. I have had the weird experience with RDS, so Ford and Nissan do things different. For example, you can't see the RD Plus line while the car's in drive on Nissans.
Oh,
but that varies every model year. So your mileage will and can vary. So you end up sending the same thing to both lines, which reduces the functionality of it. We have a piece of software that will also send out EAS alerts. And that's kind of a hit and miss deal because EAS alerts are longer than 8 characters. So it either takes forever to scroll through that little 8-character window. It just displays differently on everybody's vehicle. It's, now PAD data on HD is better. That's, I forget how many characters, but it's a longer window.
Yeah.
And all manufacturers have that longer window. So pad data, you can pretty well figure that out. But the other RD, you're never going to make everybody happy. And you should go by what the GM drives. Does he afford a GM drives a GM, whatever, but make his radio look right. And everybody else suffers.
Least amount of headaches.
That's been my experience with it.
That's easier than getting the GM to move out of a directional antenna minima. Hey,
Yeah.
Grady.
Oh, hey, I just wanted to take a minute and do something that Ben is too shy to do. I got a 552 in my lab here that I use to look at all the stations on the southeast side of the Boston market. And one of the nice things that I like about that is, do you have me so I can share my screen?
Sure.
Okay, hang on.
There you are.
The 551 and 552 monitors actually show both the logo and any graphics that you're sending right here in the listener experience page on the monitor. It's we don't have much of that going on here in the Boston market for some reason. I had to punch around a little bit in the last 20 minutes to find this particular thing, but I just thought y'all might be interested. It's nice having this thing in the rack. I love being able to take the 552 in my suitcase when I go on the road to do a consulting gig for a few days and just plug it in and show everybody.
You're too kind. Thanks, Grady.
We're sending just a static logo on HD 1 and 2, but not the album art because, and this is a funny reason, we're sponsored by the Catholics, and some of the album art from the vintage of music we play is a bit risque. So they decided not to put the album art on there.
Well, and that's kind of where having the middleware that allows you to decide what that is. So, if as opposed to just pulling from a service and you get what you get, that was a request we had from some customers specifically for that reason, because they go, well, I could end up with a really inappropriate album cover and I want to be able to manage what things are going out. So in the case of TREplus, you're able to pick, while it does go to the database and give you choices, you're able to pick the appropriate one and kind of lock it in so that, if 90% of the ones you want to play are just fine, the 10% you can either find an acceptable album art, or you could put the station logo in that place, or something else. So yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because in some places, that's a little bit of a challenge on some of these formats.
And I don't know whose station it is, but when I drive through San Antonio, 1061, I think it is. Anyway, they do album art, but they also do different things during commercials. They either play the station logo, or they throw the customer's logo, or sometimes they show a logo with the phone number. And it's obviously somebody that did the graphics did it right, because you can make out the phone number like super easy.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting that they're doing that.
Yeah. And I think that's where you can really get creative with this, right? Like, okay, here are the tools. And then depending on what somebody wants to implement, with just a little bit of graphics work, you can have some pretty nice capabilities.
Those were not my balloons, folks. I didn't do.
I was going to say, did you get to 1,000, Barry? I saw balloons.
I may have to rent that from Mark. Rich, our friends at WHYY Engineering ask, when do you expect TREplus to be delivered to customers?
We've started delivering now. So, we had some guys purchased recently, and I think we turned up Cincinnati last week, and I think we had a couple other markets this week. So for those that have already placed orders, in the next couple of weeks, market by market, we'll turn them on. And if you ordered today, it'd be turned on in next couple of weeks. We had originally were going to interface the hosted application to the same legacy TRE middleware, but then we kind of found that had we always knew it had some limitations, so we decided to redo the middleware to give us a bit more flexibility instead of having to do a 2-tier upgrade. So that probably slowed us down by maybe a month or two. So anyway, if somebody's got it on order now, it should be getting turned up in the next couple of weeks. And if you're placing an order now, it's shortly after that. It's not a very long installation process. We kind of remote in and get them set up in an hour or so.
Very good.
Well, thanks, guys. Happy to answer any of the questions, but I appreciate all the attention. And Barry, if there's anything else we can do, we're sure happy to do so. And thanks to Ben for chiming in with some great knowledge on the other half of the equation. I can tell you more about sending it. I'm a little bit less knowledgeable about catching it. And I think you've got a pretty good handle on that.
If you still have that slide up, Rich, you want to pop your email and phone number up again?
Sure. I'll sorry, I can't seem to find the button, Barry, to share screens. Hold on. There we go. So just rich@elenosgroup.com, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And you know, glad to jump on a phone call and talk through some things. Or if, look, I'm certainly not the most knowledgeable about everything. If you want to dive into something specific, we'll get the right guys, you know, on the phone for you.
Very good.
Well, thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate the time today.
Well, we hope to have you back again one of these days before too long. And
Yep,
Well-
always glad to participate. And you know, the best part is since you set this at your lunchtime, Barry, and me being in the Eastern time zone, I actually get to eat lunch before we do this. So I'm not trying to like put a sandwich in my mouth while I'm watching and being on video at the same time. So kind of works out pretty well for me. So I always appreciate this.
all right.
Thanks, guys. Have a nice day.
See you soon.
Thanks.